Welcome to Calvary Baptist Church, Idaho Falls, where we seek to glorify God, make disciples, and take the gospel to the nations. For more information about our church, please visit www.calvaryidahofalls.org.
Last week in Exodus chapter 3, we saw God appeared to Moses. God revealed himself. He gave him his name. But he invited Moses, he called Moses to be a part of his saving plan. And we talked about last week how God rescues us, how God changes us and heals us and forgives us and brings us out of slavery to sin. But just as he called Moses to go back to the slaves, to announce to them who God really was, that God had come to rescue them, to save them, to be his ambassador, not only to his people, but also to all of Egypt. That God also calls us to be his ambassadors. We saw that that's not just an Old Testament thing. God says that that's who we are in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. As we have been rescued, as we have been saved, we have now been sent to be his representatives in this world. But you and I know that when God calls, obedience is not always easy, is it? When God shows up and we get a sense, okay, God, you're calling me to do this, you're directing me to do that, usually the first thing out of our mouth is not, okay, God, sure. The first thing out of our mouth is a list of excuses of why we can't. And that's exactly what happens here in Exodus chapter 4. Moses begins to tell God why he can't do what God has called him to do. And this is not pick on Moses day, because as you read through the Bible, this is a pretty normal response to God's call. And as we look around the church and we look at our own life, it's a pretty normal call to us as well. We struggle with being obedient to what God calls us to do. We see it in all the patriarchs. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob struggled to do what God called them to do. They struggled with faith. They struggled with doubt. We see it here with Moses. We see it with Jeremiah, the prophet, or Jonah, who ran the opposite direction of where God called him to go, and even Peter, right? The one who was the leader of the first church in the book of Acts. When God called him to go preach to the Gentiles, and he said, surely not. He struggled. We struggle. And so my prayer this morning as we look at Exodus chapter 4, and Moses struggled with obedience to God's call upon his life, that it will help us as we answer God's call in our own lives. So Exodus chapter 4, beginning with verse 1. It says, Then Moses answered, But behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, The Lord did not appear to you. Then the Lord said to him, What is that in your hand? And he said, A staff. And he said, Throw it on the ground. So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. But the Lord said to Moses, Put out your hand and catch it by the tail. So he put out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand. That they may believe that the Lord your God, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. Again the Lord said to him, Put your hand inside your cloak. And he put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous like snow. Then God said, Put your hand back inside your cloak. So he put it back inside his cloak, and when he took it out, behold, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. If they will not believe you, God said, or listen to the first sign, they may believe the latter sign. And if they will not believe even these two signs, or listen to your voice, you shall take some water from the Nile and pour it on the ground. And the water that you shall take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground. So Moses has heard God's call. He knows God's name. He even believes what God has said. Moses' problem is not him and God. Moses' question is, what about these people that you are sending me to? God, if I show up to tell them about you, they're just going to look at me and think I'm crazy. Moses, you've been in the desert too long. Right? You think the bushes on fire are talking to you. What are you thinking, Moses? We're slaves. We're always going to be slaves. There's nothing you can do about it. Moses is struggling. He says, they're going to say, God, the Lord did not appear to you. So this is Moses' first question. How will they know? God, if I go and I say and I do what you tell me to do, how are they going to know? Now that's a legitimate question, folks. We can pick on Moses this morning, but when we think about what God has called us to do, to go into this world and to proclaim the good news of the gospel, what is one of the first things we deal with? Well, if I go to these people and I tell them what God has done for me, how are they going to really know that I've had an experience with Almighty God? Right? They're just going to think I'm crazy. It's going to think that I've got my own form of religion, that I just made this up. How will they know? So what does God do for Moses? He says, what's that in your hand? He said, I got a staff. Now, we don't deal with staffs much today. I mean, maybe if you herd some sheep, there are a lot of sheep herders in Idaho, and maybe they use a staff or a stick or electronic prod or something like that. But in Moses' day, for all Semitic men, so this would have been all the Hebrews, all of those who were shepherds, the staff was very, very important. Your staff was almost like your driver's license. It was an identification thing. It would have been carved, and there would have been words written on it, and it would have been unique to you. So if somebody found your staff or it was laid down on the ground, they would know, hey, that's Moses' staff. That's this guy's staff, right? It would have been uniquely yours. And we see this throughout the Bible when we look at the Old Testament and we think about that when list of items are listed for people, a lot of times for men, the staff is one of the things that's listed because it's something they always had with them. If they put up pledge for something, the staff was one of the things that they would give as pledge to say, hey, this is my word, this is my bond, I'll do this. Right? And so the staff was also, more than identification, it was also for protection, right? You're out there in the wilderness, you're trying to protect some sheep. That staff, you can use it like a bat, right? You can hit something, you can fight off the wolves, or the bears, or the lions, or whatever would come. It could also be used as a tool. Right? But the staff had a third function, and for men that were of stature, it was a symbol of authority. Right? For that man, it would have been the symbol for authority for his home. He was the man of that house. He was the leader. For those who were leaders of tribes or groups, it would have been that symbol of authority. And we're going to see that in a moment as we transition through this chapter that this staff goes from just being Moses' staff to it is called the staff of God. And when Moses is seen to bring the tribulations upon the people of Egypt, he raises the staff as the symbol of the authority of God. When he comes to the sea and they walk through on dry land because God parts it, what does Moses do? He reaches up his staff. So God has placed in Moses' hand everything he needs to answer this question, how will they know? And so he says, throw it down. Moses didn't know what he had in his hand. He just thought it was a piece of wood. He just thought it was a stick. Right? He threw it down, it became a snake. And you may think Moses was a smart guy. He was. So what did he do? He ran from a snake. Anybody who doesn't run with a snake, I don't know how smart you are. And this is in the Bible, folks. Right? I believe there's a reason why Satan appeared as a serpent in the garden, right? Don't like snakes, okay? But he threw it down. And Moses, and especially in this day and time when there was no anti-venom or anything like that, you got bit by a snake that was poisonous, you're going to die. And you're going to run from the snake till you figure out whether it's poisonous or not. So he threw it down and his staff became a serpent and Moses ran. He was afraid. But then God said, Moses, pick it up by the tail. Whoa, Moses kind of did it. I think I'd have had to question that, right? Send me to Pharaoh, but don't ask me to pick up this snake by the tail. Let me step on his head first or something. But he does it, and he picks it, and it turns back into his staff again. And God said, this is a sign that you will use for the people to know that I am real, that I have spoken to you, because staffs just don't become snakes. It doesn't happen. Something dangerous, you just don't pick it up by the tail and it turned back into a piece of wood. You see, God took something that was horribly dangerous in this day and he turned it into something totally benign. Second sign. He said if they don't believe the first one, if they think it's just kind of a trick, right? He said, I want you to take your hand, Moses, I want you to put it inside your cloak. And when you pull it out, your hand, look at it, Moses, it has got a skin disease. Now, skin diseases would be horrible even in our day when we have antibiotics and all these things to treat them. But in this day when there was no medicine to treat a skin disease that was terribly infectious, people were quarantined, people were set aside in camps and weren't even allowed to touch anyone else because of the fear of a person with a skin disease, with leprosy. This was a dangerous situation. And then God said, Moses, take your hand, put it back inside your cloak. And he did. And he brought it back out and it was completely healed. So God was once again showing these people, I have the power of God to bring disease and to heal disease. Right, Moses, they're going to listen to you, not because of you, but because of me. Because of my authority, because of my ability. And then the third sign, he said, Moses, if they still don't believe you, this is what you ought to do. He said, go down to the Nile River, get some water, and then pour it out on the ground. And that water will turn into blood. Now again, water into blood, that's pretty cool. But think about where Moses was. Think about what the Nile River was to Egypt. Even today, in our modern society, the overwhelming majority of people who live in Egypt, you know where they live? Right by the Nile River. Because the rest of Egypt is just a vast desert. The only way that life can be supported is along the Nile River. The only way crops are going to grow, the only way people are going to have any source of water is at that river. And the Egyptians believed this so strongly that they believed the Nile River was a god itself. And where had these Hebrew people been living for over 400 years? With these Egyptians who viewed this river as a source of life. For them, it had become their source of life. And Moses said, God told Moses he'd take that water and pour it on the ground, and that water will become blood. It cannot be used to save them physically. But then think about the symbol of blood as we go through the scripture. Think about the symbol of blood that's going to happen here later on in the book of Exodus. Think about what blood is. So water is life externally. It is necessary to propagate life on the earth and life for people. But blood is necessary internally. Without it, you cannot have life. So God takes the water, the external life, and turns it into blood, the internal life. This is a sign God is giving to his people about what he is going to do. I have the power, Moses, over even the gods of Egypt to take their life-giving water and to turn it into blood, which is the life-giving source of all things. And the interesting thing about the third sign, right, with the first one, the staff became a snake, and then it went back to a staff. The hand became leprous, and then it went back to being clean. The blood doesn't go back to being water again. All right, this is foreshadowing the sign that's about to happen that Moses does, the first plague, right? It turns the Nile River into blood. So Moses says, how will they know? God gives him a sign. He gives him 3 ways to show them who he is and what he has done. So what does Moses do? After having been sufficiently answered by God, he comes up with another excuse. Just like us, right? Let's look at verse 10. It says, but Moses said to the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and of tongue. The Lord said to him, who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seen or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be your mouth, and I will teach you what you shall speak. But he said, O my Lord, please send someone else. The anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth, and I will be your mouth, and you will be his mouth, and will teach you both what to do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him. And take in your hand this staff with which you shall do the signs. So Moses' second question is, God, how will I communicate? First question was, how will they know? Second is, how will I communicate? God, I can't do this. I don't know enough. I can't speak well. I can't. Now, you may think that this is Moses, and a lot of people think, well, Moses probably had a stuttering problem or all these kind of things. But that's not what the evidence of the book of Exodus suggests. Moses did a lot of speaking the rest of his career as a prophet of God. Moses was just not wanting to do what God told him to do. God, I can't do this. I'm not eloquent. Right? That was probably accurate. There's lots of other people that can speak better than me. Why have you chosen me to do this? And so God comes to you and he says, there's this person at your work. I want you to tell them about Jesus. And you go, well, God, there's certainly got to be somebody else. I don't know enough about the Bible. I'm going to just fall all over myself trying to tell them. And God says, I'll be your mouth. God says, I'll speak on your behalf. Right, God, how will I communicate? How will I tell them I cannot do this? And then God asked Moses a question. He said, who made your mouth? Right, Moses, I made you. I created your mouth. I put the words in it. I gave you the ability to speak. I gave you the ability to see. Right? I can do this, Moses, if you will trust me. Now therefore go, and I will be your mouth, and I will teach you what you shall speak. Didn't Jesus tell his disciples the same thing? He said, when they come and arrest you, right? He told them they were going to get arrested. When they come to arrest you and they haul you off in front of all these people of authority, he said, don't worry about what you're going to say. He said, in that moment, I will give you the words you are to speak. He said the same thing. I will be your mouth. I will teach you what to say. So God answers Moses again. So what does Moses do? This time he doesn't come up with another excuse. He just flat out says, please send somebody else. God, certainly there is somebody else. Is there anyone else who can do this? Right? I mean, there's got to be somebody more qualified than I am. Somebody better at this job. You know what I think God probably said to Moses in this moment? I mean, through these words, he says, yes, there is. Aaron, he can speak better than you. But you know what, Moses? I'm still sending you. I'm still calling you. See, it's not a matter of our worthiness or our ability. It's that God comes to us with the privilege and says, I want you to be a part of what I'm doing. I can find somebody else. I can find somebody else more qualified than you, better than you, smarter than you, prettier than you, whatever it may be. But I've called you. I'm asking you. I'm inviting you to be a part of what I'm doing in this world. Will you do it? Will you join me? Will you follow me? Will you be used by me? But we say, can you send someone else? And the first two excuses, God doesn't really get angry. He just gives Moses the answer. But this one, it says, then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. And God could have just wiped Moses out and started over. So I'm going to go find somebody else. But what does he do? He extends to Moses grace by calling his brother to be his partner. This is the grace of God. That even despite all of Moses' excuses, despite his disobedience, despite God saying, him telling God, go find someone else to do this, God says, no, Moses, I want you. I'm going to use you. And whoever I have to put around you, I'm going to do that because I want you. Folks, I believe God comes to us in the very same ways. He says, I want you. I want you for this task. I want you for this opportunity. And you can keep giving me excuses, but I'm just going to keep reminding you of my promises. I'm going to keep reminding you of how I've equipped you. And if I need to, I'm going to put people around you that can assist you to do what I've called you to do. So Moses decides to do it finally. God says, make sure you take that staff, right? So he went back to his father-in-law's house. And he says, listen, I got to turn in my 2 weeks notice, right? I'm not going to be a shepherd for you any longer, right? I got to go. I'm going to go back to Egypt. I'm going to see if any of my relatives are still alive. He doesn't tell Jethro the whole plan, but he tells him, I need to go back to Egypt, and I'm going to take your daughter with me because we're married now. I'm taking your grandkids. We're going. So Jethro gives him his blessing, and he leaves. And God reminds him again. He says, when you go back to Egypt, he says, you're going to do all of these signs, not just before my people, but you're going to do them before Pharaoh. He reminds Moses, you're not just going to be my representative to my people. You're going to be my representative to Pharaoh who thinks he's God. Because I'm going to show him he's not. And then there's this strange little scenario that happens here. Look with me at verse 24. It says, at the lodging place, on the way, the Lord met him and sought to put him to death. Wait, what in the world? Then Zipporah took a flint knife and cut off her son's foreskin and touched Moses' feet with it and said, surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me, so let him alone. It was then that she said, a bridegroom of blood, because of the circumcision. So all of a sudden, Moses is on his way back, and God shows up and says he's going to kill him. Now, it's not exactly clear here who the him is. But a lot of scholars will say it wasn't really Moses he was referring to, it was Moses' son. Why? Because Moses' son had not been circumcised. Moses had not done what was his responsibility to do as the covenant people of God. Remember, Abraham made a covenant with God that all the male babies should be circumcised. This was a sign, and if they weren't circumcised, then they were outside of God's promises and outside of God's people. And even though his boy was born outside of the community of God's people, Moses still should have circumcised him. And so when he's going back to do what God calls him to do, God meets him and says, listen, your obedience is necessary. Not just in what I have called you to do, but what I have told you to do. You see, sometimes we're trying to do the things that God has called us to do without doing the things that God has told us to do already. Holiness is important. Obedience is important. It's not the way to salvation, right? Salvation is by grace alone. We are saved by grace through faith. There is only one way to Jesus, and that is by faith. It is not by works, lest no one should boast, right? It says in Ephesians chapter 2. But over and over again in the Scriptures where God extends His grace, He expects us to be obedient. And God expected Moses to be obedient to what He had commanded His people to do, and Moses was not. And so God was going to show up and kill his son. And Moses' wife was quick. She was on the spot. She knew exactly, even though Moses, oh, what's going on? She took the flint knife. She circumcised the son, the job that was for Moses to do. And then she said these little ritual words, and God was satisfied with that. Thank God for faithful wives, right? Moses could not ignore the commands of God, and neither can we. I want us to look at the last part of this. Verse 27, it says, Then the Lord said to Aaron, Go into the wilderness to meet Moses. So he went and met him at the mountain of God and kissed him. And Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord with which the Lord had sent to speak, and all the signs that He had commanded him to do. Then Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the people of Israel. Aaron spoke all the words that the Lord had spoken to Moses and did the signs in the sight of the people, and the people believed. And when they heard that the Lord had visited the people of Israel and that He had seen their affliction, they bowed their heads and worshiped. I want you to see the result of Moses' obedience is God's glorification. Moses, despite his excuses, despite his protest, eventually went to do what God had called him to do. And what was the result? God was glorified. The people believed. They believed what God had said. They believed what God was going to do. Now we know that these people were fickle. These people, in just a moment, they're going to be really upset at Moses. They're going to be really mad when, Pharaoh increases their workload because, but in this moment, right here, at this time, they worship God. God is glorified. Why? Because Moses was obedient. To do what God had called him to do what God had equipped him to do. So how does this apply to us this morning? What do we do with this? How do we take this and apply it to our life right now in 2018? First thing, excuses are useless. You say, but you just got telling us that Moses gave all these excuses. But really, did it help Moses at all? He still ended up doing exactly what God called him to do. Excuses are useless. You don't tolerate excuses from your children. Right? Grandchildren, right? If you're any kind of manager at work, you don't tolerate excuses from your employees. Right? God has nothing for our excuses. Why should we think it is any different? God doesn't want our excuses. He wants our life. And if God's going to eventually get you where He wants you to be, right? And there may be a lot of pain to get you where He wants you to be. Man, He might have to knock off a lot of stuff. If you're stubborn and unwilling, right? There may be a lot of struggle. There may be a lot of pain. Some of you in this room could testify this morning to the struggle that it took for God to get you to the place that He has you right now. And how much easier it would have been for you, for your life, for your family, for your circumstance if you just said, God, from the beginning, I will. I'll do it. Excuses are useless. The second thing is that God equips us for the task that He has called us to. God doesn't call you to do something and then just say, good luck. God said, Moses, what is in your hand? He used his staff. He used his own hand. And then He gave him the ability to take the water from the Nile and to turn it into blood. You say, well, I don't have any of that, Pastor. But you know what you do have? How will people know? How will people know that God has spoken? That God is real? What has He given you? What is in your hand? Right? What has He given you? What has He given us? He has given us His Word. Not dead words on a page, but a living Word that transforms the hearts and lives of people when they read it. God has placed His Word in our hand, and He has given us the ability to share it with other people that they may know who He is. Second thing He told Moses to do is take your hand, put it in your cloak. Ooh, take it out. Ooh, it's diseased. It's messed up. You say, well, I can't do magic tricks. What has God given you? He's given you a testimony of a life that has been transformed. Just like Moses' hand was stuck in his cloak, came out diseased, went back in, it was healed. What has God done for you? He's taken your broken, messed up life, and He has healed it. He has redeemed it. He has forgiven you of your sin, past, present, and future. He has cleaned you up and made you His. Some of you in this room, maybe all of us in this room, we have had brokenness beyond what we would want to stand up here and tell other people. But God has been faithful to love us regardless, to cleanse us, to forgive us, to make us new, that we don't have to stand guilty, but we stand forgiven. God has given you a testimony of a life that has been changed. Use that to show other people who He is and what He has done. And the third thing, you might not be able to take water and pour it on the ground and become blood, but you know what? The blood of Jesus has cleansed you. And you can point to people to Christ. You can point them to His blood that was shed for the forgiveness of sin. Not just for a day or a moment or a time, but for all eternity. God has given you everything you need to do what He has called you to do. Third thing, God will speak for us. He told us He'll do it. He says, don't worry about what you're going to say. Right? It doesn't mean that we don't read the Word, that we don't understand the Word, but in that moment when we're struggling to be obedient and we don't know what to say, God will give us the words. He will allow us to speak for Him. He will speak for us. Fourth thing, your obedience matters. As we're seeking to do what God called us to do, we need to do what God has commanded us to do. If there's sin in our life that we haven't confessed, if there's things going on that we haven't got right, if there's unforgiveness towards someone else that we're harboring or holding on to, if there's bitterness, if we haven't laid those things before the feet of God, then God can't use us to do what He's called us to do. Our obedience matters. And then the last thing, when we go, God is glorified. Just like when Moses went and did what he did, despite all of his excuses, despite all of his protesting. When he went, God was glorified. And if we go, God will be glorified in our obedience, in our voice, in our life for His glory. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, I thank You this morning. I thank You for how in Your Word You include these stories of real life people. God, who so often we look at and think of as heroes, as people who have done things that we could never do. But Lord, when we really examine their life, we see that they're just messed up people like us who struggle with doubt and fear. God, Moses didn't want to do it. And God, so many times we don't want to do what You have called us to do. But I pray that just like Moses, You would give us grace to overcome our fear, to step in faith, to do exactly what it is You have called us to do. To be obedient to You, to honor You, to serve You, not out of duty or have to, but because of what You have done for us, that we are forgiven, that we have been redeemed. God, I pray for anyone in this room this morning who doesn't know You as their Savior, who's never come to that place to say, Jesus, I need Your forgiveness. Jesus, I trust You. I pray today that they would come forward in just a few moments and say, I want to know. I want to know this forgiveness. I want to know this grace that is in Jesus Christ. Lord, I pray for everyone else, wherever they are, whatever is going on, that you would be sufficient for them right now, that you would meet them right where they are and give them exactly what they need, and that we may respond in obedience to you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.